Hi, dudes and dudettes. It's me, E.H. Ivins, and this is another edition of the Radical Reset. Well, I'm going to get into the main body of what I want to talk about, but before I do, I want to talk briefly about the election. Now, prefacing that as an anti-politist, I have no dog in this hunt. In other words, I don't really give a rat's fuck whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden that win the presidency. I mean, if I wanted someone to win, I would pick Jo Jorgensen of the Libertarian Party, who's a very good candidate. Her vice presidential candidate's a little weak, but Jo Jorgensen herself is terrific, and not with dementia, so she probably would never give it over to the vice president. But a libertarian's not going to be elected president of the United States. I mean, as much as it would be an improvement, I think it's just not going to happen. So of the two major candidates, I don't give a shit. I mean, they'll talk a slightly different game, and they'll talk different platforms, and they'll do their thing. But the bottom line is that it really doesn't make, because of the institutional inertia of our current system and the poisonous bureaucracy that invades it or pervades it, it isn't going to make any difference. But having said that, I realize that right now, Joe Biden's up 18 points in the polls. It is July the 9th as I speak to you. And so, a lot of people are already writing Trump off. And I'm going to tell you something. Trump's going to win. All things being equal, Trump's going to win. And I'll tell you exactly why Trump's going to win. Because the most telegenic candidate has won every single presidential election since John F. Kennedy ran against Richard Nixon. Prior to television, and when I say television now, by extension, the internet, computer screens, smartphone screens, et cetera, prior to visual medium, presidents were elected a very different way, but visual medium has changed everything. And consequently, think about it. Kennedy obviously was far more telegenic. When I say telegenic, the camera loved him, the camera hated Richard Nixon. But stay with me, because when he was elected later, you'll see I'm not inconsistent. Kennedy was much more telegenic than Richard Nixon head to head. Subsequent to that, JFK was much more telegenic than Barry Goldwater, who came off as a fanatic, where LBJ came off as a good old boy from down the road in Texas. I mean, it's not like he was a great, again, it's relative. I'm not saying that LBJ was a great television performer. I'm saying relative to Barry Goldwater, he was terrific. Then we have Richard Nixon against Hubert Humphrey, and while Nixon was a stiff next to JFK, he had learned a lot. He had learned about makeup, he had learned about lighting, he had learned how to control his sweat, and he was light years more telegenic than Hubert Humphrey. Those of you who are old enough, like I am, to remember that particular election live. George McGovern, I remember when I was a kid, I used to do a caricature of George McGovern. I don't think it would mean anything to, hi, I'm very, very pleased to be here. Okay, that was, George McGovern was just a wimpy candidate and a lousy, had no telegenics at all. Nixon just crushed him. Okay, Nixon resigns, blah, blah, blah. Gerald Ford against Jimmy Carter. No contest. Jimmy Carter, light years more telegenic, much warmer smile, much less clumsy, much less halting, much smoother on television, a much better performer. But then when he came up against Ronald Reagan, come on, no one had a chance against Ronald Reagan. Not Jimmy Carter, not Walter Mondale. Then comes George Bush against Michael Dukakis. Well, the Democrats, doing what they have managed to do even today, managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And George Bush was light years more telegenic than Michael Dukakis, but when he ran against Bill Clinton, it was no horse race. And he had a double whammy because Ross Perot was also more telegenic than George Bush, so the poor guy never had a chance. This is George Bush the first, by the way. So Bill Clinton was a terrific television performer. No one's going to argue with me about that. Yada, yada, yada. It's the year 2000. George Bush II and Al Gore, I realize he wasn't a junior. I'm just using that as an easy reference. Remember Al Gore? We're going to put it in the lock box. Okay, let's just say that George Bush, for all the kidding around and all the Will Ferrell sketches on SNL, was much more telegenic and approachable and easy to deal with as a result. The camera liked him. Here's a little secret I learned about performing on camera. If I were acting, I wouldn't be looking into the camera right now. And if I wasn't looking into the camera, I could fool you. In other words, I could pretend to be a nice person when I'm not. So for example, one of my very good friends over the years is an attorney for 20th Century Fox Television. One of the things that she told me was, and this is on point, I'm not digressing, of course I'm always curious who was the nicest, who was the meanest in Hollywood kind of thing, because her job was to negotiate the contracts of these various TV stars. And I said, who is the most likable? Now this is going to date this a little bit, but you'll be with me. You'll all know who I'm talking about. I said, who is the nicest person, the nicest star that you've ever had to deal with? And she said, oh, far and away, the best reputation, the person everyone loves to deal with the most is Demi Moore. Now, at the time, Demi Moore was playing bitches in the movies, which goes to show you that if you're not looking into the camera, you can play a bitch, or you can play a lot of different things, hardcore, yada, 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 and, fool the camera. But off the screen, she was just as nice as the day is long. So then I said, who was the biggest pain in the ass to work with? And she said, oh, no one wants to work with Tony Danza. And if you think about it, his career went and the reason for that was he was a bastard. And he always played the nice guy on TV. But, you can play a nice guy on Taxing. You can play a nice guy on your situation comedy. But again, you're not looking into the camera. When you look into the camera sees into your soul and who you really are. And it tells the person watching you whether you really give a shit or not. You can tell whether looking into the camera is the ultimate lie detector. So for politicians, that's a dangerous thing. And they can tell when people don't mean it. So when Bob Dole ran against Bill Clinton, and Bob Dole was running on tax cuts, which he had never supported before, and he would look into the camera and say, I'm going to cut your taxes, no one believed him because the camera's a lie detector. But when Bill Clinton looked into the camera and said, I care about you, he meant it. Now, he was a lot of things, and he was, well, we won't get into that. But the bottom line was he did care. And because he cared, it came through on the camera, and he was a superb performer. And he won. George Bush the same way. He might have been a little clumsy. He might have, mangled words. He might have miscombobulated things. But in the end, he was approachable and friendly versus Al Gore's cold and John Kerry's patrician. Nose stuck in the air, too good for you kind of guy. So then we get Barack Obama, who, come on, just a superb television performer. And now we have Donald Trump, who's made his entire career in television. Now he's running against a man who has the onset of dementia. Now, you can argue that with me all you guys want, but, if it walks like a duck, and it talks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And good old Joe, he's got dementia. There's just no doubt about it. And he's a terrible television performer. He's a terrible candidate. I don't know how the hell he ended up being the nominee over a guy like Pete Buttigieg, who the camera loved. But primaries are different because fanatics vote in primaries. Normal people don't vote in primary elections. Normal people vote only in the general election. That's why primaries have such low turnout. So a primary can go to a weird candidate just because only the most extreme, the extreme left and the Democrats, the extreme right and the Republicans, only the extremes vote in primaries. But in a general election, you get this telegenic, and Donald Trump is just light years more telegenic. He's going to win, and he's going to win walking away, and that's why he beat Hillary Clinton. In the end, he's an asshole, but he's an honest asshole who really believes what he's saying, and that's what comes through in the camera, that he's genuine and real, and he's not double talking, and that's what people that support him like. And in the end, people will think back to how strong the economy was. They'll take a look at how much smoother and more natural he is on camera. All things will come together. COVID will be put into perspective by the time November comes. July to November, you might as well say, 2020 to 2030. It's just an eternity in politics, and Donald Trump's going to win. Okay, now, on to the subject matter today. And the subject matter today has to do with the press and the ignorance and the judgmentalism and the wokeness and the eating of their own that's going on right now. So, as part of the recovery, and I'm bringing this up because I want to point out to you how things are so misrepresented in the mainstream, and how you can be fooled over the simplest of things. You might remember that at the time the COVID first came out, the government introduced something called PPP. PPP is the Paycheck Protection Program. And the idea was, it's for small businesses. Just to remind you what this is, if you have less than 500 employees, you can apply through PPP for a loan. And as long as 80 or 85% of your employees come back to work after the crisis, the loan is not a loan, it is forgiven. Now, that sounds like a great program. It encourages employment. And want to know something? It's the kind of program that even I, as a basic libertarian, can agree with. Why can I agree with it? Because this is not a program that's going to go on and on and on forever. This was a short-term fix for a problem caused by government. In other words, government is who destroyed the business of all these restaurants. Government is who destroyed the business of all these small companies. The COVID crisis and our reaction to it, and rushing to judgment and shutting down the economy and making everybody stay home, destroyed the government, destroyed the economy. Okay, there might have been a good reason for it, but the destruction of the economy is 100% in this instance caused by the government. So compensation for this is completely appropriate. The only thing I differ is calling it a loan at all. I mean, from my point of view, it should just be a grant. But listen, that's splitting hairs. It's going to end up being a grant, assuming that the employees come back. Now, at first, the press was all on board with this and all the other COVID shit. But then they do what they always do. Remember the 7 deadly sins, and at the very top of the list is pride, which all reporters have because they all think they're smarter than everybody else. And then second down is envy, okay? So let's think about envy. So articles came out this week, both in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and these articles were slamming the PPP. And why were they slamming the PPP? Because they disapproved of the companies who had taken PPP loans, okay? So to give you some example, muy brands, MUI, like muy fabuloso, muy bien, I almost said muchos gracias, not muy gracias, but muy bien, it means very in Spanish. Muy Brands, which is a Texas franchisor of Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and Wendy's. They have over 750 stores. They're a fast food chain. They're a fast food franchisee, took a PPP. Press fucking hated it. Why? Because, fast food's bad for you. The National Enquirer took a PPP loan. You just know the mainstream hates that shit. The National Enquirer, the rag that you pick up in the grocery store on your way out with, Duchess, what's her name, Stupt, Prince, what's his name, with those fucking crazy stories. Anyway, they took a PPP loan. An artist named Jeff Koons took a PPP loan. Now, he has 53 employees. He does kind of a mass production of art, and he has 53 employees, and he took a PPP loan, but that didn't seem to the Washington Post or the New York Times like a very good thing. Yeezy Clothes, which is Kanye West's clothing brand, took a PPP loan. Now, that would have been thought of as a great thing until Kanye West, this week he denounced Donald Trump, but the week before he was Donald Trump's best friend, and of course that's no fucking good, and they all hate Kanye West because whether he likes Donald Trump or not, he's been attacking the mainstream, and so, this was a loan that was decried as, oh my God, he took it. The Girl Scouts, those traditionalist throwbacks to the 50s, took a PPP loan. I'm kidding. I love the Girl Scouts, but you know how the mainstream thinks about them. TGI Fridays restaurants, PF Chang's restaurants. And then it got really, this is where they really got sneery, okay? The Soho House, which is a private club, took a PPP loan. It's a private members-only guest club, took a PPP loan. Basically, how dare they, this private exclusive club that serves the wealthy, how dare they take a PPP loan? Over 400 country clubs and golf resorts have taken PPP loans. Again, the reaction of the mainstream is, oh my God, all those rich people's golf resorts and country clubs are all taking PPP loans. That's not what the program was meant to do. But let me stop there, because you're going to kind of get the gist of what I'm saying. All these disapproved are disapproved because the mainstream media disapproves of their business. And I'm sure if we dug deep enough, we would find strip clubs that took PPP loans, and we would find massage businesses that took PPP loans, and we would find all kinds of things. But here's the thing. Number one, the destruction was caused by the government. The kind of business is really immaterial. The country club's business was destroyed exactly the same as a business that would be on maybe a recycling business on the approved list of what was politically correct. They all have employees, and those employees' paychecks need to cash. And if those employees' paychecks don't cash, or they don't get a paycheck, they can't pay their rent, they can't pay for their cars, they can't pay for their food, they can't support their children, they can't clothe their children, they can't buy health care, they can't do anything without a paycheck. Where do we get it when the government destroys a business, and it does it with a shotgun? It didn't just target the businesses it didn't like for whatever politically correct or woke reason. When it destroyed the entire economy and put out there a compensation for that destruction, why is it even relevant what kind of business it is? I mean, what fucking difference does it make? Because the press doesn't like the idea that do country club employees not get paychecks the same as the employees of the YMCA? Is there some fucking difference in how their money spends? Does the guy who cleans the golf carts or cleans the clubs or caddies or cuts the grass or the greenskeeper's staff or whatever it might be, all the things that go into running a country club, the cooks, the servers, the banquet help, all the people that go, the normal everyday people that get their jobs at the country club, if no one's showing up, they don't have a job. If no one's showing up, which they weren't because they were being isolated, and all these people that work at the country club don't have a job, what are they going to fucking do? Okay, and that's what the PPP is, the perfect program in terms of what a government program should be, because it's compensating for destruction caused by the government without repayment, straight out, and when this crisis is over, it goes away. This is not going to be like welfare that goes on and on and on and on and on. This is a one-time thing for a one-time set of circumstances. Why is the type of business relevant? What difference does it make if it's Yeezy clothes or whether it's Levi's brand? It doesn't matter. As long as it's a small employer, those paychecks have to cash. The people who work at Yeezy brands, and I've never been there in my life, and I don't even know what the hell they are, to be perfectly honest, and I couldn't pick out one on the street if my life depended on it, and I'm not a fan of Kanye West, but who gives a shit? He has employees. He has lots of employees. They have to have a paycheck. And as wealthy as he is, his money will run out fast if he's trying to pay it out of his pocket. And this, again, the destruction was caused by the government. Now, the government had a good reason. It had a scientific reason. That this pandemic, I'm not a denier that this is a real pandemic. I don't believe there's a conspiracy here, and I hope that you don't either, because that's just stupid, as I talked about in my last video. But having said that, the PPP is designed to mitigate the destruction caused by government policy. And the kind of business it is, whether it's a fast food brand in Texas or whether it's the National Enquirer. Look, I don't read the National Enquirer, but there are a lot of people that work there, the people that deliver it to the grocery stores, the people that run the presses, the people that load it on the trucks, the people that write the stories, the people that edit the stories, the people that organize, the people that set the type, whatever they do. I don't really know the whole process in producing a newspaper anymore. I'm an old man compared to what it's probably all electronic, but all the people running all these different parts have to get paid. And they're not responsible for the content of the National Enquirer. They are just working stiffs like the rest of us, going to work every day, and the destruction of their employer was caused by government action. Therefore, government compensation to mitigate the destruction caused by government action, even though it was well intended, even though it was necessary, it is irrelevant what the company does. And when you see this kind of woke shit being run constantly about what's appropriate and what isn't appropriate, it's just the epitome of arrogance, wokeness, political correctness, and stupidity, okay? People need their paychecks. This economy was ruined by the government, maybe for good reason, but ruined by the government. The compensation, the PPP, is entirely appropriate. It's a good government program because it will cease to exist when the crisis is over. So dismount from your high horses if you're any one of the people that have been sitting here looking at the list of companies who have gotten PPP loans. This one knew Donald Trump, this one was a friend of it. Look, in business, it's impossible not to have contacts. It's impossible not to have friends. It's impossible not to come in contact with a lot of people. That's kind of like slight digression when I see these posters of all the people that knew Jeffrey Epstein, and so by association they must be guilty. I don't know, Neville Chamberlain met Adolf Hitler. It didn't make him guilty of Nazism. I mean, people, you can get your picture taken with a lot of people, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily subscribe to their sick shit. And, that you happen to work at the National Enquirer and you needed a job, who gives a shit whether, okay, it's not the New York Times, fuck you. I mean, what difference does it make? Okay, it doesn't matter to the people collecting the paycheck. Stop thinking about whether you agree with the position of the CEO and start thinking about the hundreds, translating by many companies to thousands and then millions. The largest employers in the country combined are these small companies that have lost their jobs because of government action, and that deserves compensation, and that's what the PPP is. Okay, now, one more thing I want to cover, maybe two more things. I want to cover payday loans. So, under Barack Obama, one of his great ideas was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That was actually Elizabeth Warren's idea. Donald Trump has gutted it, thank God. And as a result of the gutting of the Obama era, during the Obama era, the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Board, which doesn't answer to anyone, it was this super bureaucratic, detached thing that not even the Congress or the president could get at, although Trump single-mindedly went after the motherfucker and got it. But I'm digressing. The CFPB, the idea was to protect consumers. Well, one of the things that they fucking hated was payday lending. And you guys have all seen the ads on TV, like Title Max and all that, get your title back with Title Max. I know I just ruined that song. But anyway, these are basically 29% loans short term for people that have, get cut. And there are apps for this. You can borrow a quick $100 or I don't know. I've never done it, so I don't really know the name of the apps. But you know what I'm talking about. And how they make their money is they charge very high interest. Okay, so Obama era struck it down because they said this was predatory lending. Let me turn that, but let's talk about free markets and how free markets provide. These are essentially, a loan on a car title, a depreciated asset, is not a very safe loan. In fact, in the great panoply of loans, it is unbelievably unsafe because you don't know if the collateral is going to be worth what you're making the loan for. And secondly, anyone who would borrow money on the title of a car is someone who's we're talking about the bottom of the barrel of borrowers. We're talking about people who have gotten their tit in a wringer either by bad decisions or bad circumstances, but the key word is bad. Consequently, lots and lots of these loans never get paid back. Lots and lots of these loans end up charged off. Lots and lots of these loans end up just lost money. So the risk and reward are connected. The reason they charge 29% instead of 0%, like for example, I'm proud to say that this week I financed a car, a Volkswagen Tiguan. I got 0% financing for, I think it was 72 months. Why? I have excellent credit. I've rebuilt my credit since being in prison, thank God. But what if my credit was awful? It would be awful for a reason. It's awful because I would be a shit borrower. And if I'm a shit borrower and 0% isn't going to compensate the risk that Volkswagen's taking in lending me money to buy that car. Consequently, 29%, the reason that these are the people that need to pay, otherwise no one's going to lend to them. And for the people, the majority who are going to get the money that they need and then they're going to pay the loan back, great. But for the huge percentage of them that don't, the company, in order to be able to provide the funds to the next guy that needs money to pinch, needs to be able to collect enough interest based on the risk of the loan. And they perform a vital function because, if my kids, for example, not anymore because they're richer than me, but way back in the day when my kids were not richer than me and they would get into a pinch, they could call me up and say, Dad, I need $500 for this or that, and I would give them the $500. But what for the people that don't have it? Well, their only recourse is payday lending. This is where the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I'm sure the Obama administration meant well through the CFPB to outlaw payday lending. But anyway, thank God that party's over. Payday lending is back. And it's an extremely, extremely important part of the economy. Look, if the people at the bottom can't get their hands on money to make the rent, it has a butterfly effect. It affects the landlord, it affects the vendors to the landlord, et cetera, et cetera. You all understand that. These businesses exist because there's a voluntary market for them. Remember, whether it's the PPP, and businesses like the National Enquirer, people who buy the National Enquirer aren't being forced to buy it. People who take payday loans aren't being forced to take them. This is a voluntary transaction in a voluntary economy between people, a company and a person volunteering for that transaction. Who are we to say it's a good or bad transaction? Who are we to judge whether it's fair or it's unfair? Okay, the reason 29% interest sounds terrible to those of us who have credit good enough to buy cars at 0%, but to somebody whose credit is, let's say, 400 or 450, they couldn't borrow money if their life depended on it if it wasn't for payday loans and these title loans and things like that, payday lenders. And most of them don't even have bank accounts. Most of them cash their checks at the payday lenders, and the payday lenders charge a fee. Why? Because most of the checks aren't coming from the U.S. government. Most of them are coming from private companies that the payday lender has no way of knowing whether or not the check's going to be good. Consequently, they have to charge for it. And why do these people not have bank accounts? Because their credit is awful. Why is their credit awful? Because they've made vile and horrible decisions. How are they going to get out of it? By taking loans from payday lenders, rebuilding their credit, paying it back, getting good credit ratings as a result, and slowly working their way back to what's the word I'm looking for? I was going to say goodness, but that doesn't sound right. Normalcy? Not really. But anyway, working their way back to responsibility, to where they are good risk, to where they can borrow at least in single digits, if not 0%, depending on the time that they borrow the money, so on and so forth. So the point I'm making is, the more the government interferes, the more poorly it does. But in some cases, when the government causes the damage, programs like PPP are appropriate. And that brings us to why anti-politism is such a good system. In an anti-political government, we wouldn't be arguing over what kind of companies take the PPP loans. The PPP loans are something like it. A better design program, frankly, of grants would have been the result of an anti-political Congress. And, because there wouldn't be Democrats and Republicans, people taking sides, the press coverage would be more fair. There wouldn't be partisans for one side or the other, which is really what's going on here. Because the mainstream, to say that they hate Donald Trump is the understatement of the century so far. And again, I'm no big fan, but he's got a point. He's not exactly, he gave a speech the other day, just one last digression. He gave a speech at Mount Rushmore. And if you were looking at the New York Times or the Washington Post, the headlines they ran were Donald Trump stokes, and I'm paraphrasing it, but Donald Trump stokes Confederate, reminiscences and divisive speech given at Mount Rushmore, yada, 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 defending Confederate statues. Okay. I want you after this video to go onto the internet, get a copy of Donald Trump's speech that he gave at Mount Rushmore. I want you to read it. It wasn't a long speech. Read it word for word. There is not one word about Confederacy or statues or race or Black Lives Matter or anything else like that. It was strictly a typical July 4th patriotic, isn't America great speech. Read the speech. It was as vanilla and as patriotic. It was really one of the best speeches he's ever given, okay? And not one word of division, not one word of Democrats versus Republicans, not one word of racism, not one word of Confederacy, nothing. But if you read the articles, and literally read the articles in the New York Times and the Washington Post, which I did, you would walk away positive that he was talking Confederate statues the whole time, okay? And just never mentioned. It just never came up. It was an enormous misrepresentation. And this is what the mainstream does to candidates and ideas and parties that don't toe the line with their woke, politically correct idea of the way the world should be. And that's why we should all be anti-politics. Let's get rid of political parties. Let's get rid of the divisions between us, and let's start talking about what works as opposed to what ideology we subscribe to. So pick up your free copy of A Radical Reset, the Manifesto of Antipolitism, free for you if you're a Amazon Prime member, small charge for a paperback copy if you're not. Also, be sure to click on the subscribe button, please. Click on the notification button, and most importantly, through antipolitism.org, join us in the movement. Let's put together an organization. Now, we're at the very beginnings now. There's just a handful of us. But a year from now, there could be 1 million of us. 2 years from now, tens of millions of us. We can change America, and America's going down the drain, my friends. It's going down the drain financially. It's going down the drain politically. It's going down the drain culturally, and we have got to change the course. And the only viable alternative is anti-politism. It's not Marxism and socialism. I can show you hundreds of millions of dead people to prove that that's never going to work. It's not going to be the same old thing that we've been doing. It's going to be anti-politism. Read the manifesto. Join the movement, antipolitism.org. And I'm going to leave it there. I want to thank you very much for joining me. It's been fun as always. And until next time, this is E.H. Ivins signing off.